L'Assemblée.
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic. I request protocol to escort His Excellency.
Au nom de l'Assemblée générale, j'ai l'honneur de souhaiter.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I have the honor to welcome to the United Nations His Excellency Emmanuel Macron, President of the French Republic, and to invite him to address the Assembly.
Monsieur le secrétaire général des Nations Unies,
Secretary General of the
Mesdames
United
et Messieurs,
Nations,
les chefs
distinguished
d'État et de
delegates,
gouvernement.
distinguished heads of state and of government,
J'ai aujourd'hui
if it is my privilege here today to take the floor before
je
you,
sais à qui je le dois.
I know to whom I owe that privilege.
Je le dois à tous
I
ceux
owe
qui,
that privilege to
voici
all
un
of
peu plus de
those
60
who,
ans,
just over 70
se
years
sont
ago,
levés contre un régime barbare
rose
qui s'est
up
emparé de mon
against
pays.
the barbaric regime that had seized my country,
dois aux
France.
nations
I owe it to those
qui ont entendu
nations
le
that
cri de ceux
heard
qui
our
ont
cry
condamné
of
l'Afrique,
resistance and who from
l'océan
America,
d'Asie,
Africa,
vers les côtes
Oceania and
françaises
Asia
envoyés à leurs
sent their
secours,
sons and daughters
leurs
to
filles et
our
leurs fils.
aid.
Ils ne savaient pas tous
They
ce
did not all know very much about France,
mais ils savaient que
but
la défaite de
they
la France
knew that were France to be defeated, this would also be the defeat for the ideals that they shared with us, of which they were proud and for which they were ready to give their lives. They knew that their freedom and their values depended upon the freedom of other women and of other men who lived thousands of kilometers away from them. I also owe that privilege to those who, once the war had ended, dared to take the path of reconciliation and to build a new international order. Those who, like René Cassin, understood that human rights lay at the heart of international legitimacy. Those who tried the guilty, gave succor to the victims, made amends for the wrongs. Those who believed that the values that this war had flouted had to be restored. Values of tolerance, of freedom, of humanity. Those values that lay at the heart of the United Nations. Not because those were fine values, but because they were just values and they held the worst at bay. And if I say that, all of that, it's not just to talk to you about history, but today, when I hear our colleagues talking about the world that we exist in today, they forget about the history that is behind us. They talk about our current interests, then they talk about what will be determinative for our lives. So whereas my country today holds a somewhat unique position in the world order of nations, this means that we also owe a debt to all of those who have no voice. And I myself know that it is the duty of France to speak up for those who have no voice. Because speaking for those who have no voice means speaking for all of us, today and in the future. And it is those who have no voice that I would wish to convey to you. I spoke to Bana, a citizen of Aleppo, and I would like to bring to you his voice to you. She lived under the terror of bombing militias. She lived in refugee camps. The Syrian people has now suffered enough for the international community to now acknowledge its collective failure and must ask itself about its methods to build a durable and just peace. It's urgent for us to move towards political settlement, as the Security Council had tried to do with its resolutions 2254 from 2015. France lay at the heart of that initiative. We are putting together a roadmap for Syria, and I would like for all of the P5 to work together with us. The Astana format can be useful, but it is not enough. And recent days have thrown light on the challenges we face. We need to give ourselves the resources we need to begin negotiations, because the solution will be political, not a military solution. It's in the interest of all of us to move in that direction, and first and foremost in the interest of Syria. I have already stated what our two red lines are. Firstly, France will be unwavering against the use of chemical weapons. The perpetrators of the attack of the 4th of April must be brought to international justice. This must never happen again. And then we have also the absolute need to ensure access to care, to healthcare for all, to enable medical facilities, to provide care to people. France has made this will make this one of the priorities of our chairmanship of the Security Council. We must act for peace in Syria, and we must also act against Islamic terrorism. We must fight against terrorism in Syria, in Iraq. That is what we are doing. We are acting for the benefit of all those who have perished over the past months, because jihadist terrorism has hit our countries and across all continents, regardless of religion. We must protect ourselves by joining forces. Security must become our first priority. This lies at the heart of the initiatives that France has come up with against the use of the internet for terrorist purpose and against the financing of terrorism. And in 2018, it's for this reason that I will be organizing a conference on this specific topic, and I call for all of you to become involved in that. It's also the purpose of the military action that we are undertaking as part of the coalition in Syria and Iraq. Our fight against terrorism is a military fight, but it is also an educational fight, a cultural fight, and a moral fight. And it takes the form of our action in the Middle East and in Africa, but also in Asia. And it must bring all of us together. I heard also the voice of Ousmane, a schoolchild in Gao, and I would like to bring to you the voice of Ousmane here today. He grew up in Mali, haunted by indiscriminate attacks, and his only dream was to go to school, to be able to go to school without risking his life. In Sahel, we are all committed. The United Nations, the countries within MINUSMA, the G5 Joint Force, the European Union and its member states. And I would like to pay tribute to all stakeholders there and acknowledge that it is an extremely difficult challenge that we face. Our challenge is to, once again, eliminate terrorism and to build national capacity so that states will take charge of their security themselves. Regardless of the resources we put in there, we will fail in our collective mission if the countries most affected fail to shoulder their own responsibility in this matter. And it's for this reason that since taking office, I have supported the deployment of the G5 Sahel Joint Force, and I call for your collective mobilization here too. I would like to invest in strengthening our support to African peacekeeping missions, because that is our future. We must give new thought to the linkage between peacekeeping, regional organizations and host countries. Our capacity to respond to the aspirations for peace of our populations will depend on that. A military response can never be the only response. I would like here and now to highlight the importance of a political response, and of course I refer to the implementation of the Algiers Agreement and the need for development policy. I also heard the voice of Kouamé, and I wish to bring to you the voice of Kouamé here today. Left on the roadside, Kouamé crossed Africa before placing his fate in the hands of smugglers in Libya. He crossed the Mediterranean. He reached the other shore of the Mediterranean, whereas so many others perished. The refugee, the displaced person, the person who we sadly term the migrant, is today, sadly, the symbol of our era, the symbol of a world where there are no barriers to the onwards march of despair. We must change the road of need into the road of freedom. The reasons are climate, ethnic conflict, and it's always the road of necessity, the root of need, the need to flee persecution. The Rohingyas, more than 400,000 refugees, the majority of them children. Military operations there must cease. Access to humanitarian aid must be provided, and the rule of law must be re-established, because, as we all know, we are dealing with ethnic cleansing here. France will be making a relevant initiative within the Security Council to that effect. Need also concerns the need to save your country when war is raging, and international humanitarian law is no longer respected but instrumentalized, as it is in Syria. Exile, the need for exile, when the upholders of freedom become the first targets. Protection of refugees is a moral duty, a political duty, and France has decided to uphold that duty. We will support the High Commissioner for Refugees everywhere where the High Commission will intervene by opening up routes for escape for refugees wherever this is required, and by defending and upholding the Geneva Convention. On the 28th of April last, we brought together African countries and European countries that were most affected by migration along the central Mediterranean route. We adopted a roadmap, and the priority is there to combat trafficking, the traffickers whose stock in trade is despair. We must put an end to unbearable violations of fundamental human rights by putting in place humanitarian infrastructure with HRC and IOM, and by helping origin countries and transit countries to better control migration flows. Faced with terrorism, migration, etc., short-term responses are not enough. We must address the profound causes of instability in our world. Migration and terrorism are political challenges, first and foremost, for all of us. The causes here are of a civilizational order, of a moral order. If we are to overcome these challenges, it's only through development. And it's for this reason that France will devote 0.55% of our national income for public development aid over the next 5 years. I thank you for the applause, but I think that that applause needs to be tempered, because I think that some were awaiting more, that it's not enough, and that France is not stepping up to the table enough. And it's not because it's a matter of money, it's a matter of the efficiency of the use of that money. It's how we spend the money. It's how we take responsibility for the expenditure of that money that we are all contributing. Of course, I wish France to step up to the table when it comes to overseas development aid, but development aid must be more innovative. We must be more intelligent. We must use different methods. We must step up to our responsibilities. And the challenge that we face is to ensure that development aid actually arrives in the countries where it's needed, properly evaluated, that it's used for the initial purposes that were assigned. And so with the European Union, UNDP and the World Bank, we will be doing that. We are setting clear priorities. And the first priority that we have set ourselves is to invest in education, because it's here where we can win the fight against obscurantism. It is here that we can fight against this phenomenon that is bringing down entire regions and entire countries. I call here upon the international community to step up to the table in February 2018 in Dakar, when we set up the World Partnership for Education, and France will co-chair that with Senegal. This is a key struggle for all of us. We must give the opportunities to young girls and to young boys to obtain an education, to choose their own future, not the future that is imposed on them by need, but the future that they should choose for themselves, and we should enable that here in this room. Our second priority is health, to combat pandemics, to combat malnutrition, because you can have no hope when you are unable to educate yourself or to have access to healthcare. We advocate for development, for the role of women, for culture, for freedom of expression. Wherever the role of women is undermined, development is undermined too. It's the ability of a country to develop, to take its proper place in the world is undermined. So this is a civilizational combat. This is our combat. This is our fight. This is a universal fight and struggle that concerns all continents and all people. Wherever culture is undermined, it is our collective ability to rise to challenges that is undermined too. And that is why UNESCO is such an important organization today. It has a key role to play to preserve a human face for the world at a time when obscurantism seeks to wipe out that human face. We must preserve progress, and freedom of expression is a most urgent and pressing topic. We must protect the liberty of those who think, who express themselves, and we must preserve the freedom of the press. And it's for this reason that I call for the designation of a special representative of the SG for the protection of journalists across the world. Because if we don't protect the freedom of expression, the freedom of the press, well then we will all suffer. And finally, I would like to speak on behalf of Jules, my fellow Frenchman. Jules lives on the island of Saint-Martin. I am thinking of his house in ruins, the fear that he harbors that this may happen again, because climate change is leading to an increasing number of disasters and catastrophes. The future of our world is the future of our planet, and our planet is wreaking revenge for the folly of mankind. We must shoulder our responsibility. The planet will not negotiate with us. Humankind must defend itself by protecting itself. Extreme weather events will explode the traditional differences between the North and the South. We are all affected by the flailings of the climate in China, in the Caribbean, in Russia, or in the Horn of Africa. Before this August Assembly, my country promised that we would achieve a universal agreement in Paris. That was achieved, and it was signed in this very room. That agreement is not up for renegotiation. It binds us. It rallies us together. Taking it apart would mean taking apart a pact that exists not just between states, but also between generations. It can be improved. We can have new contributions, new input, but we will not backtrack. I fully respect the decision of the United States. I fully respect the decision of the United States, but the door will always be open. However, we will continue with all governments alongside local government, cities, enterprises, NGOs and citizens. We will continue to implement the Paris Agreement. On our side, we have the strength of pioneers, we have endurance, we have the certainty and energy of those who wish to build a better world. And that better world will lead to innovation, to job creation. However, That may not be pleasing to those who think that the future is about looking to the past. We will build it right now by making our contributions as nations, as France did by adopting its climate plan, which places us on the road to carbon neutrality. On the 12th of December of this year, we will be meeting in Paris with those who wish to drive forward with a real solution and who wish to mobilize public and private financing. And I would like to confirm that France will be playing its full role here by allocating 5 billion euros to climate action between now and 2020. We are redoubling our ambitions, and this very afternoon, we will be introducing a global pact for the environment. And our ambition here will be to forge the international law for the coming century, and we will do that with the support of UN agencies. At a time when some want us to stop, we must move forward. We must continue advancing, because climate change is not stopping, because extreme weather events are not stopping, because our duty of solidarity and of humanity is not stopping either. Distinguished delegates, behind all of our decisions, there are the voices that I brought to you and the lives that I brought to you. There are the invisible masses of those for whom we must stand, because back in the day, people stood up for us and defended us. Those voices that are brought to us, why do we not heed them to a greater extent? Why don't we do that which 60 years inspired mankind with the strength to believe in itself? Planetary responsibility, the desire for mutual assistance and progress. I talked to you about Jules, Ousmane, etc. They are our compatriots, all of us, the compatriots of all of us, because their security is our security and vice versa. We are inextricably linked to each other in a community of destiny, a community of fate, today and in the future. The balances, our global balances, have changed radically in recent years. The world has become a multipolar world, and this means that we must learn anew the complexity of dialogue, but also the riches that dialogue can bring to us. Our collective action is coming up against obstacles stemming from instability in states. And in Libya, 6 years after the military intervention, I acknowledge before this assembly the particular responsibility that France shoulders to ensure that Libya regains its stability. The meeting that was held in La Celle Saint-Cloud on July 25th enabled us to make progress with the reconciliation that we need in order to ensure the success of the political process under the auspices of the United Nations. Alongside the Secretary General and his Special Representative, in 2018, we must succeed with organizing elections to mark the real restoration of the state, and I will do my utmost to achieve that. The same goes for Venezuela. Collective action must enable us to uphold democracy, to ensure the upholding of democracy, and we must give no ground to dictatorial trends that we see underway today. In Ukraine, too, we must ensure the upholding of the commitments that have been made. We must ensure a ceasefire, a real ceasefire, and we must work together with our partners, particularly Germany, to get the parties to that conflict to uphold international law, to respect international law, and put an end to this conflict. Multilateralism, the multilateral approach, is facing a challenge in meeting the challenges of nuclear proliferation. Pyongyang has crossed a major threshold in military escalation. Allow us to acknowledge that. This is a threat that concerns all of us. It's an existential threat, a collective one. North Korea has not made not given any sign of wishing to negotiate to date. The North Korean government is determined to raise the stakes. Our responsibility, together with all of our partners, including China and Russia, is through resolve to bring North Korea to the negotiation table for a political settlement to this conflict. France rejects escalation and will not close any door to dialogue, provided that the conditions are brought together for a dialogue in favor of peace. And it is the same objective that it's for the same objective that I would like to speak in favor of the nuclear agreement with Iran. We put together a solid, robust and verifiable agreement with Iran that will ensure that Iran does not obtain nuclear weapons. Renouncing it would be a grave error. It would be irresponsible for us to fail to uphold that agreement, because this is a good agreement, an agreement that's essential to peace at a time when a downward spiral cannot be discounted. And this is what I said yesterday to my US and Iranian partners. I wish for us to work on constraining the ballistic activity of Iran. We must work on the post-2020 solution. We must increase our demands, but we must not cast aside the achievements that we have made with previous agreements. Thanks to dialogue, we have managed to resolve the Iranian situation. Dialogue, multilateralism is the only way forward, and that applies to North Korea too. I cannot say whether my successor in the far future, in 70 years' time, will have the privilege of speaking before you. Will multilateralism survive this time of doubt and change? In truth, we ought to recall the state of our world 70 years ago, a world that was broken by war, that was stunned by genocide, and we ought to try to regain the optimism that we held up in the face of so many reasons to doubt back then. We must regain faith in what brings us together. We must find trust again and confidence in these founding values of the United Nations, universal values that protect all individuals across the planet and guarantee their dignity. But how have we got to the current situation, distinguished delegates? The reason is that we have allowed the idea to proliferate that multilateralism is a kind of game, a game for diplomats sitting around a table. The tool of the weak. That is what has happened over the past few years. Because we allowed the idea to gain currency that we were stronger if we took unilateral action. That multilateralism was not capable of addressing all challenges. So we have allowed this situation to drag on. We have failed to address climate change. We have failed to address the challenges that have been brought about by unregulated capitalism. If we continue along that road, it's survival of the fittest that will prevail. We have forgotten the history that has made us. We have allowed the idea to gain currency that it's the survival of the fittest. But the challenge that we face as a generation is to regain our values, to recognize that there is nothing more effective than multilateralism in our current world, because all our challenges are multilateral. War, terrorism, climate change, the digital economy, etc. We can only address those challenges through multilateralism, not through the law of the fittest, the survival of the fittest, because our vision of the world, if we are to achieve our vision of the world, it's only through multilateralism that we will do that, because our vision is universal, not regional. Because any time that we have conceded certain ideas on the equality of women, for example, that equality of women is a matter for one civilization but another, well then we are abandoning the universality of our values. We have allowed the survival of the fittest approach to prevail in certain countries, because any time that the great powers sitting around the table at the Security Council, they have renounced multilateralism, failed to live up to the agreements that they have signed, well then they have undermined multilateralism. We must uphold multilateralism for sustainable peace in the future.
Alors oui, aujourd'hui plus que jamais,
today, more than ever before, we need multilateralism, not because it's somehow a refuge for intellectuals. It's because multilateralism is about the rule of law. It's about exchanges between people. It's in all of our interests. It is through multilateralism that we will build peace and rise to the challenges that face us. For us to achieve that, well, we have the United Nations, which has the full legitimacy to address the challenges faced by our world. And it's for that reason that I wish our United Nations to be more effective, more responsible, and more agile. And I support the project of the Secretary General and his ambition to make this into an organization that is able to face up to the challenges we face. And we must seek resources for that. We must seek ways of addressing the received notions that some of us may have. We need a Security Council that is in a position to make effective decisions, that doesn't use its veto when atrocities are carried out. We need a better representation of all continents. We need better coordination in crisis management with the European Union, the African Union, and the key sub-regional organizations that we work with. And it's for this reason that France will be standing shoulder to shoulder with the United Nations in carrying out the reform that's in the pipeline. Distinguished delegates, I would like to say to you that these forgotten voices that I've conveyed to you today have their rightful place in this august hall, where all of us have our rightful place, where we must listen to those voices that are left aside. If we were to fail to listen to the voices of the victims and of the oppressed, then we would enable the challenges that they face to grow until such time as they engulf all of us. The safety of all of us is also their safety. Their lives are our lives. Failing to hear the voices of those who are calling for our help is to believe that it's walls that protect us, but it's not walls that protect us. It's our desire to act. It's our refusal to accept that history is written without our input, and that what protects us is our sovereignty and our sovereign use of force for the victims that of our world. Failing to listen to those voices would be to believe that their despair is not ours. But what we need to protect is peace, freedom, and justice. It's not something that we can just enjoy in our own corner. If we don't stand up for those values, then all of us will be affected. And today, more than ever before, our common good is our security. Our security is their security. We cannot have, on the one hand, one camp that's multilateral, another camp that's unilateral in its approach. That is the wrong approach. So together with all of you, I wish for all of us to believe in strong and responsible multilateralism. It is the responsibility of our generation as a whole. We, distinguished delegates, must display courage, the courage to hear those voices. We must acknowledge their stories, and at all times we must balance our interests and our values. Our safety and security is the common good of our planet, and our generation faces no other choice, because we must speak up today and we must speak up for our common future. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
On behalf of the General Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the French Republic for the statement just made. May I request representatives to remain seated while we greet the Head of State.